Hi all, happy Monday. I hope you had a good weekend. Today we are going to be solving quadratics by completing the square. So I'm going to go through these notes for you, and at certain points I'm going to have you pause and have you try examples. So in that case, make sure that you pause, try the example, check your work, and if you need to pause me again to spend more time to go through it step by step, do that. And of course, remember that you have your classmates to ask questions to, and then you guys can piece things together. So given you have some questions, and of course I'll answer questions tomorrow as well. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to solve by using the square root property. So basically what that means is instead of factoring where we set it equal to 0, we are just going to factor right from the get-go because on the left-hand side here we have a perfect square. So if you look at the first one and we factor, we look for what multiplies to 4 and adds to 4. So our numbers are 2 and 2. So we get x plus 2, or in other words, x plus 2 squared, and that equals 25. So what we're going to do now is in order to get rid of the square, we take the square root of both sides. When we do that, we get x plus 2 equals plus or minus 5. And of course, to get x by itself, we are going to subtract 2 from both sides. So when we do that, we get x equals 3 and negative 7, and those are our two solutions. So keep in mind that you can also solve this one by factoring. That's another option. All right, go ahead and try out number 2, and then check your work. This one was just a little bit different because over here when we took the square root of 25, it was a perfect square. Over here, the square root of 7 doesn't have a perfect square. So we need to leave it as the square root of 7 so that we get an exact answer. So remember, if you were to check this one on your calculator, you would see that it would be crossing at 3 and at negative 7. So we would get a parabola that would look like that. Over here, these are not going to be nice numbers. They're going to be decimals. So keep that in mind that we do like exact answers. And here, calculator wouldn't, in number 2, calculator would not be a good method in order to get those exact answers. Okay, so completing the square, we talked about this briefly on Friday before the quiz. So if we want to complete the square, we're looking to fill in the blank. Figure out what number would make this a perfect square. So then when we factor it, we get just something squared. So our rule in number 7 here is to take b divided by 2 and square it. And that gives us c, or that last number to make it a perfect square. So here, b is 6. So in order to get c, or that last number, I would take b divided by 2 and square it. Or in other words, 6 divided by 2 squared. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and square it, so we would get 9. The reason that that's a perfect square is x squared plus 6x plus 9. Well, that factors to x plus 3, x plus 3. All right, similarly, in number 2, 8 divided by 2 squared, because we took that middle number, cut it in half, and squared it. That's 4 squared, so we would add in 16. You guys try out the next handfuls. So 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. Okay, so check your work and see how you did. You might want to pause me again just to look it back over, and we're going to move on to the next type. So the next type is to actually find that c. So we're doing the same thing, but it does say to factor after. So to find c, we're going to take b, which is 18, divided by 2. We get 9, and then we square it. So we get 81. So it'll look something like x squared plus 18x plus 81. So if we want to factor that, we would see what multiplies to 81 and adds to 18, and that's 9 and 9. So x plus 9, x plus 9, or in other words, x plus 9 squared. Notice that it is a perfect square. It will always, always, always be a perfect square. That's our whole goal of completing the square. So try out the next one. You will get a fraction, but trust your calculator if you aren't happy with using fractions. All right, so notice this one. When we took b, which is negative 3, and divided it by 2, we got 9/4, which is a fraction, which is okay. So our c value here was 9/4. When we factor it, it's difficult to think of things that multiply to 9/4 and add to negative 3. So here, if you notice in number 1, that number divided by 2, when we got 9, that ended up being the number in our factor. So this b divided by 2 part, that 9, is what ends up going in the factor. So in number 2, that b divided by 2 part, that will always be the thing that goes in the factor. So that's how I came up with the negative 3/2 without trying to come up with those numbers on my own. All right, so our next goal now is to solve using completing the square. So far we've solved by factoring. We got solutions on the calculator, and these were rounded, so that's not always good. And then today we're going to get our solutions with completing the square. So these give us exact answers, which makes us happy campers. Okay, so what our first step is when we do this is to solve. We want to make sure the number is by itself. So step one, and I wouldn't write these here. I'd probably write them at the top of the front page. So x is on one side and the number on the other. So in this one, we're all good because the x's are on one side, the number's on the other. So now we complete the square. So x squared plus 10x plus blank equals 1 plus blank. The reason that we have a blank on both sides is because we learned way back when we were first solving equations that if we add something to one side, we have to add it to the other. So when I complete the square, I take that 10, I divide it by 2, and I square it. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So we added 25 into each side. So now when we factor this, it ends up being a perfect square on the left. So x plus 5 squared equals 26. And now this looks exactly like what we did right at the beginning. So take a square root of both sides, and we get x plus 5 equals plus and minus root 26. Last step, subtract 5 from both sides. So negative 5 plus or minus square root of 26. So over here, our third step would be solve using the square root property. Okay, so I'd like for you guys to try out number 4. Keep in mind that your first step will being to make sure that you get 7 by itself. So give it a shot, pause me, and check back when you're done. All right, so just running through this step by step, we got the 7 by itself, completed the square by adding a 1 to both sides. The left factor to x plus 1 squared, 7 plus 1 is 8. Take the square root of both sides. Don't forget about your plus or minus. And so we got x plus 1 equals plus or minus root 8. But keep in mind that root 8 is really 2 root 2 because root 8 is really root 4 times root 2, which is 2 root 2. Another way to do that is to tree it. So to take 8 and say that's made up of 4 and 2 and 2 and 2. So you're looking for perfect squares, which there's 1 perfect square. So you take out the 2, and then the 1, 2 is left inside of the house. Okay, so go ahead and try out the next 2 as well. Keep in mind 6 is a little bit tricky because you have a 3/4 in there, but once again, just let your calculator help you with your fractions. Okay, so just briefly talking through these, now that you have tried them out, and of course pause them right down as much as you need to. Over here in number 5, we once again had to factor tree the root 12, and that's how we got that 2 root 3. So right over here I have my work for the factor tree. For number 6, I added the 3/4 to both sides. Keep in mind that there's a minus right here, so there must be a minus right here, which is why that's a negative as opposed to all the other ones being a positive so far. Also, when we took the square root of 7/4, you're taking the square root of the whole thing. And so that's why I ended up with a 2 on the bottom, because 4 has a perfect square of 2. All right, number 7 is a little bit different because here we have a coefficient of 4 out front. I hope you like the music in the background. Maddie is playing with her books. So with that coefficient out front, we want to make sure that we make them all, or make it equal to 1 just like we did before. So we divide everything by 4, and we get x squared plus 5x plus 1/4 equals 0. And now it looks like what we just did. So I will go through this one fairly fast. Pause me when necessary. So get your x's on one side, numbers on the other. Complete the square. So 5 divided by 2 squared is 5/2. Square it, you get 25 over 4. So we add 25 over to 4 to both sides. So when we factor, we get x plus 5/2 squared. Remember that that's that b divided by 2. So 5 divided by 2 is what goes in our parentheses. And then we get 24 over 4. So now we're going to take the square root of both sides. When we do that, we get x plus 5/2. When I take the square root of the other side, I get 24 over 4. So I subtract my 5/2 from both sides, plus or minus square root of 24. So I'm not going to write square root of 24 because that's actually 2 root 6 when we tree it, and that would be over 2. And of course, at the end, I can cancel those out. So my final answer would be negative 5/2 plus or minus root 6, and we are done. Go ahead, try out the last one, and then we have one more type. Okay, so I have shown all the work for 1 through 8. Spend as much time as you need. And the last type that we're going to do today is solving or putting things into vertex form. So this looks a little bit different because we're not actually solving it. We're going to try to put it in vertex form. So if you recall, standard form is this ax squared plus bx plus c. Vertex form is when we can get the vertex hk right away. So notice that here we have a complete square, so that's why completing the square helps. So in this case, we're still going to move the singleton number over to the other side. That would be our first step. And then we're going to continue just like we did before. So we have y plus 9. There is a y in the way, but that's okay. Just leave it there. Don't worry about it. Plus blank equals x squared plus 10x plus blank. So in this case, we complete the square. So we divide 10 by 2 and we square it. So we get 25 that we add on to both sides. So on the left, we get y plus 34. And on the right, that ends up factoring to x plus 5 squared. So now when we subtract 34 from both sides, because we want to get y by itself, we now have it in vertex form. Keep in mind the vertex would be negative 5, negative 34. Okay, so I'll go through one more like that, and then you can try one out on your own. So subtract 13 from both sides, and then complete the square. So we get y minus 13. We take 18 divided by 2, which is 9, and square it. So we add 81 to both sides. So the left-hand side, or I'm sorry, the right-hand side factors to x minus 9 squared, and the left-hand side becomes 81 minus 13, which is 68, hopefully. 68 plus 13, yeah. And then last but not least, get y by itself. So x minus 9 squared minus 68. Hopefully my math was okay there because I didn't have my calculator handy. All right, try out the last one on your own. Okay, so check your work in that last one, and keep in mind we got a little bit of bigger numbers here. Before, what we did with those is we actually found the vertex using negative b over 2a, and then we plugged it in. So here, this is just another method. You decide which one you prefer. Both are acceptable. Just completing the square is sometimes a useful method. All right, the last thing that we're going to do today is an application problem. So we have a box, it's 4 inches high, the length is 1.5 times its width, and the volume is 1,350 inches cubed, actually. What are the length and width of the box? So if we draw a box, we're going to label it with the givens. All right, so here we know volume is length times width times height. So in this case, the volume is the length, which is x times the width, which is 1.5x times the height. And the volume we can actually replace with 1,350. So now we can just solve for x. We are looking for the width, and I may have misspoken. The width here is x, and then this guy is our length, and then this guy is our height. So we get 1.5 times 4, which is 6x squared, equals 1350. Divide both sides by 6, and then take the square root. Here we will not use plus and minus because width is with respect to a length. All right, so we end up getting 15 inches for the width. Homework is Math Excel. Give it a shot, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.